Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Esiet sveicināti Riga. Welcome to Riga. If I could ask everyone to take their seats, we'd like to get going. We do have an awful lot on the program this afternoon. I'm Karin Helmstaedt, and on behalf of CEN and CENELEC and our hosts, the Latvian Presidency of the Council of the European Union, and of course the Ministry of Economics, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 4th European Standardization Summit. We do have a big day ahead of us. And many of you probably noticed when we arrived at the airport yesterday that this event is indeed part of the official program of the Latvian presidency, and we're delighted to gather here in Riga to discuss how standardization can help contribute to a smarter and cleaner economy here in Europe. Now let me add, ladies and gentlemen, that our host city Riga was indeed a European capital of culture just last year, and our location, the National Library of Latvia, also known as the Castle of Light, was itself inspired by a story from Latvian folklore. Now, according to legend, the Castle of Light sank into an ancient lake and would only arise again once the Latvian people had regained mastery of their city, their lands, and their destiny. Well, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, it has indeed risen. And seeing as it's one of the greatest culture and construction projects of the 21st century so far in Latvia, I think it's a very fitting location for this summit where we intend to put the focus on the construction sector. Now, just to review, the construction sector amounts to more than 10% of Europe's economic output. Now, that means it provides almost 30% of industrial employment, or about 20 million jobs. It also represents a sizable chunk of the Latvian economy, and that's why for this summit we're putting the spotlight on construction as we look to see how standards within that sector can help us to achieve those goals of a smarter and cleaner economy. Improving the energy performance of buildings, integrating sustainability into architecture, developing smart cities, that's a big topic, linking science and standardization, and advancing the design and the management of buildings. These are some of the topics that we'll be addressing here today in your breakout sessions, and we're certainly also hoping that the chance to network and engage with many different stakeholders from all across the sector will give you some necessary insight into the state of play in the construction sector at the moment and how standardization itself is linked to all of the future developments that we're very eager to see. But before we get to the meat of our program, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for some official remarks. And to start, I'd like to ask our host to kick things off with an opening address. Please welcome Dana Reizniece-Ozola. She is Minister of Economic Affairs for Latvia. And Madame la Ministre, the lectern is yours. Please give her a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Dear honorable guests, delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you all to the European Standardization Summit. Ludwig Wittgenstein told once in his philosophical investigations, there's one thing of which one can say neither that it is 1 meter long, neither that it is not 1 meter long, and that is the standard meter in Paris. And this meter standard has its peculiar role in language game of measuring with a meter rule. It is not something that is represented, but is a means of representation itself. So dear standardologues, you are the gamekeepers, and I'm not talking about some formal, bureaucratic and boring job. You are actually the, if I may say so, guardian angels of human possibility to understand each other, to deal with other, to talk with each other, and actually to measure each other. All the beauty of communication between different people of different nations, different businesses all around the world is for centuries actually guarded by you. And this was the funny part, but I'm really happy to meet you all here, the Guardian Angels, in this event. So dear colleagues, let's all imagine that there are 8 competing standards. We say ridiculous. We need to develop a common, universal one that also promotes a green and smart economy. Logical, but do you know what happens after a while? We have already 9 competing standards, and this might have been a joke, but it also signifies actually the importance of this event today, because it's not a joke, it is a reality. And I'm proud that this event is happening here in Riga, in the Castle of Light. The Castle of Light, as the moderator already said, quite recently became the new home to the National Library of Latvia and a new repository of our national knowledge. And it is one of the symbolic projects of the standardization of the construction area needing in it. By elevating the profile of the summit to a higher plane, we have managed to bring together all the stakeholders, and crucially, we are bringing this event closer to the attention of the European Parliament and European Commission. I can also see that today the summit has brought together different interest groups with a single purpose: to show that our knowledge is better preserved, multiplied, or generated through collaborative processes, which are very important. This year, the summit aims to promote the role of standardization in the journey towards a cleaner and smarter economy, with a specific emphasis on the construction sector. And in this context, I wish to emphasize 2 ideas: the voluntary, market-driven nature of standards, which can achieve a sustainable future, and strategic and determined thinking on the development of standards to achieve a sustainable future. On the first idea, the general wisdom is that moving to a cleaner and smarter economic model promises a much brighter future for the European economy. It would allow the realization of benefits both in a mid-term and long-term perspective. One example, for example, is the food safety standards that has enabled our businesses with a competitive edge for exports worldwide. However, I strongly hold the view that this process should not take the form of pushing businesses and citizens to change their practices and behavior through legislative prescription. Instead, it should take the form of relevant technological change, information sharing and pooling, and where appropriate also through incentives. The deregulatory role of standards should thus be exploited here to the full. In other words, the market-driven standards should be seen as the most preferable choice, and it is my belief that an imposed regulatory framework is usually not no substitute for voluntary agreements between governments and interested parties. At the same time, the EU government, from their side, also must invest heavily in scientific assessments and harmonization research activities. Now, on the second idea, that determination, it should be pointed out that standards imbue us with confidence, protect us against risks, and ensure cross-border trade. This should specifically be taken into consideration when discussing a plan for building a greener and smarter economy. In particular, we need new ideas and initiatives in the construction sector, since the construction sector is of strategic importance to delivering what the rest of the economy and society needs. And therefore, I believe the time has come to move from conversation actually to action. And during these days, we will have some more conversation, and I hope that afterwards some real action also will follow. And here we have a simple choice: a comprehensive plan for the economy that is green and smart, or a plan to stay with a brown economy with all of its inefficiencies, which are manifested in great quantities of waste, in production processes that consume more natural resources than it is necessary, and so on. So having set our expectations high, let me conclude by posing two questions. Rhetoric ones, of course. Do we want a green and smart future? Definitely, I guess. And that is why we are all here to discuss ways to achieve it with market-driven means. And do we have a plan to achieve it? Not yet, but I'm sure that with collaboration today, we could move forward to developing one. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very keen to ensure that an extensive debate takes place throughout and after the Latvian presidency, which can then influence subsequent policy making. We all have a role to play when it comes to allowing us to flourish in a green and innovative economy. And I strongly believe that only together it is possible to seek best fit solutions and to build a cleaner and smarter economy that benefits every one of us. And I hope that you will enjoy our common endeavor. And thank you for your attention, and have a nice working day today.
Thank you very much to Ms. Reizniece-Ozola for those words from the Latvian presidency and for underlining and emphasizing the importance of this gathering here today. How many of you are here? How many nationalities have come together in this one room for this summit, and for throwing some very important questions into the room that I'm sure are going to be coming up again and again, and hopefully by the end of our proceedings this afternoon, we'll have come up with a few answers. But as I was saying with one of the speakers earlier, questions generate more questions, and eventually we will get to plans. Let's hope that we get to them sooner than later. Following on that message, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to welcome our next introductory speaker, who is Vicky Ford. She's a member of European Parliament since 2009 and has been variously involved in industry, research, energy, and economic and monetary affairs. She's currently the chair of the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection in the European Parliament. So please give her a warm welcome, Vicky Ford.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And may I say how much I've enjoyed working with the Latvian presidency on many different issues. It's great to be back in Riga, and what a wonderful building to choose to have your conference looking at smart buildings and construction projects. Congratulations, there couldn't be anywhere better. Rather than just follow that one issue, I wanted to broaden, if possible, the wider debate on standards and how they are set, and throw in some questions. This is a topic that is getting a huge increase of interest all across Europe, partly because the Commission's better regulation agenda has pushed the issue of standard setting up the political agenda in Europe, but also the really high profile of the ongoing negotiations on our EU-US free trade agreement means that the members of public that we politicians represent are increasingly asking us to explain how standards are set in other parts of the world as well as in Europe. The Parliament's own Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee does have a co-legislative role on issues regarding standard setting, and MEPs on the committee treat this responsibility very seriously. And although it may seem from the outside that standards are the preserve of always technical experts, they do play a really vital role in the functioning of the modern free market economy, because consumers and businesses need to be confident that the product or service they're buying is what it claims to be. And without that confidence, trade cannot happen and the market does not function. And this is why standards have always been important in the single market, especially as we're trading across borders in 28 different countries, each of which has such different economic and social conditions and histories. And in an increasingly globalized world, we often need to make sure that the standards that we are developing work internationally. And you're going to be talking about smart cities. So the international development of standards is especially true in sectors like the digital economy, where we need systems, services, and products that can all communicate together in that high-quality, secure, reliable manner, irrespective of what device or what technology you're using in order to access your digital services, and also make sure that you can communicate not just across European borders, but increasingly across the world. And that now does require a coherent approach relevant to all users, whether it's public entities, private entities, or societal users, and in all sorts of sectors, as well as construction. We have transport, health, security, energy, all contributing towards that sort of smart city initiative. And on top of this, then, the digital world, the digital revolution that we are living in, is so constantly innovating that the standards are always needing to be kept up to date. And that's why some of the hot topics under discussion in standard setting world today are 5G, the Internet of Things, big data, etc., etc. And I know that many of my colleagues on the industry committee in the Parliament are also looking at these issues with great detail and looking forward to working with the Commission on these issues in the new DSM agenda. In the Internal Markets Committee, my colleague Evelyn Gebhardt will be looking at standards in the digital era in the context of her report on the digital single market. So if you're interested in that issue, please do contact her. Having the largest markets in the world can give European enterprises a competitive edge. And I know that the standards that are put in place in Europe often do become that model for global convergence. But even having said that, there are times when a global approach may not be appropriate for every part of the world, or even a harmonized approach between two similar areas. And a case-by-case approach is often called for. I mentioned the public focus on the TTIP, the EU-US Free Trade Agreement, and I really urge you, please, experts on standards, to get engaged in helping us to communicate with a concerned public how standards are set in different parts of the world and why this is important. And I often find it's helpful to use case studies to explain the issues. And a really good example was given to MEPs just last week when the organisation DECRA, which is the world's leading vehicle safety body, came down to Strasbourg and met with MEPs and presented their views on standards setting on both sides of the Atlantic. And we know there's been cooperation in many sectors, in some cases for over 50 years, and that just because regulators and standard setters meet together and share ideas does not always mean that their standards are the same. The example I found really clear was on car design, and you're going to be talking about a cleaner economy as well. So in the US, they explained that more accidents happen when vehicles roll over. And this is partly because of road design, totally different way of designing roads, and also because people choose to drive different types of vehicles. So in America, the safety standard calls for a much heavier roof. But we don't need that in Europe, and indeed we wouldn't want it because of the standards that we've set on emissions and efficiency. And so we have two different standards which are both appropriate in reaching the objectives on either side of the Atlantic. And the more that we can explain to our consumers who are contacting us that just because regulators cooperate doesn't mean that they are automatically going to converge, or that we are going to give away the right to set our own regulations in different parts of the world, is an important message to be giving. Having said that, It is also very clear that where a common international standard is appropriate and can be developed, there are very significant economies of scale, especially in high-volume sectors, which would achieve both higher safety standards and lower costs and a win-win solution. So there is great value in encouraging this global and international cooperation, and therefore let's get behind these trade negotiations. International issues aside, now is also a good time to look at how standards are set in Europe. And since 1985, I understand that around 90% of the different national standards that industry must apply have been removed, enhancing trade flows across the EU. And the vast amount of this process has been driven not by top-down diktats or politicians telling industry what to do, but by a bottom-up approach led by manufacturers who want to make sure that the products they produce and use are compatible and interoperable with others in the market. And this open approach allows industry to respond to innovation and to changes in user needs. It is important that that open approach can and does continue. There is furthermore little point in setting a standard if it is not relevant and if that standard never gets used, or indeed if it cannot be enforced. It's important, I believe, that product designers, manufacturers and users are involved in the development of standards, and it's worth remembering that a significant proportion of users of products are themselves manufacturers or businesses and the B2B uses of standards. As a member of the Parliament, though, I frequently get complaints about who is involved in the industry groups that set standards, or complaints that the system is opaque or undemocratic. And small and medium-sized businesses especially feel less able to contribute to the process, or that the cost of complying, if it is a mandatory standard, such as in construction products, is simply unsustainable. It is not right that only the voices that are heard in this subject are those of large multinationals, and it is good to have a more diverse community. I was pleased to read in the press last week that the Commission is considering how to increase transparency in the standard setting process, because I believe it's important that those affected by a standard can find out how to be involved in the meeting, what's going to be discussed and how they can contribute. And I would encourage the Commission to include as many interested stakeholders as possible, even if the legislation just says you need to consult with A, B and C, doesn't mean that you should exclude other people from the room. And I believe more could be done to increase transparency and confidence. My colleague Otmar Karas's report on better regulation suggested that draft standards should be put in the public domain at an early stage, enabling a much more thorough consultation. And I was very interested to learn this morning that the Latvian government indeed does do this and has a much more public disclosure digitally of early stage consultation on all draft proposals. So there clearly is a good practice here. And I believe that this is especially important if a new standard or a change in a standard could lead to products being taken off the market altogether. We've seen in recent times that consumers can get very irate and angry when a ban is put on a product, and if they feel they don't understand the reasons for that ban. And I believe that increasing the ability for the public to be involved and giving them the option to be involved before a decision is finalized could help with this public perception of what standards are meant to do. Furthermore, standards can make it much easier for businesses to trade and give consumers security, but we also want diversity in our markets, and a one-size-fits-all is sometimes not so necessary. There is a particular concern in the Parliament at the moment about standards on services. And last week, my colleague Andreas Schwab hosted a meeting in the Parliament to discuss medical services and standards on medical services. It may be very helpful to have standards on lots of procedural issues in the health sector. Are there proper processes for cleanliness, for maintaining a sterile environment, for making sure that patients' consent was properly requested and registered? But there was also a lot of concern from politicians and practitioners about any concept of drafting standards on how professionals should relate to patients. And I'm sure that this issue is going to continue to come up when we're looking at the details of standards for services. So again, I would urge the Commission to talk closely with politicians and members of the Parliament on that. On traditional products, there are areas where a rigid, harmonized standard may be helpful, especially for safety reasons, but other areas where it just may not be necessary. I think at the moment, especially with so many big issues going on with our economy, our security, people are expecting politicians to focus on the big issues. And in the committee, we've just been updating and modernizing rules, safety rules for products like cable cars, ovens, life jackets. And then the Parliament drew a line and said, you know what, we don't need to have a rigid, harmonized standard for washing up gloves. So we need to know where to stop with our legislation. And this is where we also have a difference between saying you can have a standard which you can choose to follow as opposed to a standard which is mandatory. So to conclude, poorly conceived standards can stifle competition and stifle new ideas, and the public will ridicule them. We've learnt that. But well-set common standards can underpin innovation, be a driver of competitiveness, contribute to that clean, green and smart economy that we so want, and deliver economic growth. And the current public and political focus on standards provides us with the opportunity to really improve our processes and to improve the understanding of the public we serve and why these standards are so important. Let's seize this opportunity and get it right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much to Vicky Ford for another very energetic laying out of many examples. Standards translate to market confidence, a good point to start off with, and public involvement is key to the implementation of relevant standards. And that's a point that I've heard also just in the short time before the summit began, coming up again and again, the importance of communication. And I think we'll be touching on that later on this afternoon after our breakout sessions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, after that, we'd like to round off with some opening words from our organizers and obviously from the standards camp themselves. Tore Trondvold is CENELEC president, and he's also chair of the joint presidents group of CENELEC and ETSI. And so as we embark on this extremely important summit here today, let's hear what Mr. Trondvold has to say. The lectern is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a warm round of applause.
Madam Minister, Mrs. Ford, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. Speaking on behalf of CEN and CENELEC in my capacity as the current chairman of our joint presidential committee, I would like to welcome you all to this fourth standardization summit here in Riga. We are grateful, even very grateful, to the Ministry of Economics and Latvian Standards for hosting this event and hosting our meetings here in Riga as a part of the Latvian Presidency of the Council of the European Union program. And especially meeting, as the previous speaker has said, in this newly erected National Library. It's very pleasant to be here. Excellent meeting rooms, and this auditorium fits very well for our summit. So thank you for that. I'm also glad to see that we have many national members of CEN and CENELEC present, and also important people from the European institutions, EU and EFTA, and also our affiliates and our partner organizations are present. So, in a way, we can say that the whole European standardization community is here today. I'm also very happy to see that so many people from Latvia have decided to join us. And I would especially encourage you to take good use of this day and to participate in the summit and share your ideas with those working every day with standardization. This is a time for networking, making new connections. The main theme of today's summit is how standardization can support the transition to a cleaner and smarter economy. This theme is closely aligned with the objectives of the Europe 2020 strategy, which aims to support Europe's economic recovery by promoting smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. It directly relates to the goal of creating a more resource-efficient, low-carbon economy, and this is necessary in order to reduce greenhouse gases emission and limit the negative impact of climate change. It will also contribute to making Europe less dependent on energy import. During our discussions this afternoon, we will focus primarily on the construction sector, which represents a major part of the European single market and is especially important in the Latvian economy. As one of my previous speakers said, the construction sector accounts for more than 10% of Europe's economic output. It mostly consists of small and medium-sized enterprises and provides some 20 million jobs in the European economic area. And speaking about SMEs, I would like to comfort Vicky Ford that the vast majority of our experts comes from small and medium-sized enterprises. They are very well represented in our work. Standards can contribute to achieving a smarter and cleaner economy in the construction sector. For example, by promoting the spread of best practices with regard to reducing energy consumption, by establishing clear guidance for assessing the sustainability of the buildings and the building materials, and also the construction works. Standards also have an important role to play in supporting the development of smart and sustainable cities and communities. This concept encompasses energy-efficient buildings, clean transport, like electric vehicles, smart grids, renewable energy, as well as information and communication technologies, the ICT field. And in this area, CEN and CENELEC are becoming increasingly active, working together with ETSI, which also is present here today. And we have a close cooperation with the European Commission and the DG Connect on this matter. I hope that this summit will be an occasion for all of you to learn about the work that is going on in the European standardization organizations in relation to the construction sector and smart cities. Today is a chance for us to discuss some of the challenges we are facing, as well as the opportunities that are opening up in terms of increasing stakeholder involvement, as well as new topics to be addressed, and new standards that could be developed in the coming years. Just in case some of you are not very familiar with the world of European standards, I would like to highlight a few key aspects which I think are especially relevant to discuss here today. European standards are powerful tools for sharing and spreading best practices. They are developed by teams of experts who must take into account the views of all relevant stakeholders and incorporate the latest technological development and innovations. And as mentioned by Vicky Ford, it's important that standards are not compulsory. That will limit the innovation. All standards are voluntary, but some of them are used as support for European regulation. That is a good way of understanding it. Standards are voluntary, and in many cases, it's the best way to ensure that you are in line with the directives, but still you have the freedom to do it in another way if you can prove that they are according to the safety level prescribed by our politicians. Then I would like to switch to another chapter, which is the benefit that we have here in Europe. We have an internal market, and this internal market contains 33 European countries that use the same standard for the same product or service. That means every member of CENELEC has to implement the standards in their country, and most important, to withdraw conflicting national standards. And that is the strength and the difference between the European system and all other regional systems. Ms. Ford, she mentioned the TTIP negotiations. The system in the US is completely different from the European system. And we would urge to the politician to take very much care of the European system, because what we would like is not to give access to the European market of 600 million consumers without giving the European industry the same chance to access the American market, which is only half the size. So that is an important message that we cannot repeat often enough. I mentioned that standards are a very useful tool to support regulation, and about 20% of the standards, the ENs that we produce in CENELEC and ETSI, are as support of regulation. The other 80% is to be used by businesses, between business and business, between business and consumer, for conformity assessment. So that means it's only a small part, well, 1/50 is not a small part, but an important part, that is to support regulation. The rest is for the daily use of everyone. We have a jubileum today, and I'm not sure that you are aware of that jubileum. Today, the 4th of June, 2015, is exactly 30 years since the official journal of the European Communities published the new approach. So it's a 30 years anniversary for the new approach. And we are very supportive to the new approach, and I think that our politicians are also happy that it exists and would like to keep it. 30 years ago, it was only 10 member states in the European Union. Today, there are a lot more. It's almost tripled, it's 28. But in addition to that, you have the 3 EFTA states that are also a member of the European Economic Area, which practice these standards, using the standards. And by harmonizing regulation and standards and removing tariffs and technical barriers to trade between our countries, we can create jobs, encourage enterprise, and promote shared prosperity based on sustainable growth. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot to discuss this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to the next part of the program. I encourage all of you to take the most out of this opportunity. We are counting on your active participation, especially during the breakout session. Thank you for your attendance.